We've all once imagined what it would be like to have your own private island, but then we remembered we're missing a few M's in the bank. Well, it turns out there are beautiful islands all around the world that are running for dirty cheap, but because of their dark history, or other problems that many people can't get past, they are completely uninhibited. Fact Feed presents Breathtaking Islands No One Wants to Buy for Any Price. PITCAIRN Island. You won't believe it, but the land on this island is completely free for anyone willing to live there. The weather is good, and there would be little chance of confrontation with the neighbors. So, what's the problem? The population on Britain's smallest colony has been dwindling for years, and there are now fewer than 50 islanders left. But locals are struggling to find new settlers to follow in the footsteps of Fletcher Christian, who led the mutiny. Only one application has been received to move the island, even though the government provides all immigrants with a plot to build their own house, and temperatures stay above 62 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 17 degrees Celsius, all year round. The island, one of 14 remaining British overseas territories, was tarnished by a child abuse scandal in 2004, when 6 men were imprisoned for sexual offenses, including Steve Christian, the mayor and a descendant of Fletcher. Since then, the Pitcairners have been sustained by government aid as their population has shrunk. At its height, just before the Second World War, 200 residents lived on the subtropical island, which measures 2 square miles. We've been appealing for more people to boost the population, said Jackie Christian, 44, who represents the island in Europe. We've had many inquiries, but only one person has applied to move to Pitcairn. The reality is that we don't really have any jobs to offer. Islanders used to sell stamps to raise funds. Of course, stamp collecting is not as popular as it once was. She added that there are now fewer ships running between Pitcairn and New Zealand, more than 3,000 miles away. There is only one general store on the island, which opens 3 times a week. Orders for food from New Zealand must be placed every 3 months. Most of the island's population is descended from the 8 mutineers who settled on the island in 1789 after Christian mutinied against William Bligh, the Bounty's captain. They brought 6 Polynesian men and 12 women from Tahiti with them. Miss Christian admitted that the island's location seemed like the middle of nowhere. But once you were there, you were as connected as anywhere else, she said. The island has electricity and the internet now. It's a special place, and it's beautiful seeing the stars without light pollution. There are the bluest waters you have ever seen. Doxa. Doxa is a small uninhabited island in the Croatian part of the Adriatic Sea. The cypress and cactus-covered island of Doxa is located just 1.5 nautical miles from Dubrovnik, Croatia's most popular and expensive tourist destination. In 2013, Doxa was put up for sale for €2 million, a suspiciously low price by private island standards. The name Doxa is derived from the Greek word dexios, meaning right hand. According to local historians, the tiny island has long offered protection to sailors caught in stormy weather. At just 500 meters long and 200 meters wide, Doxa is the smallest of the 13 islands of the Elephite archipelago. But for the bargain price of €2 million, buyers will get much more than a little piece of land within swimming distance of Dubrovnik. The island of Doxa, which is also covered in pine, lemon, and orange trees, has a spacious villa, its own 19th century lighthouse, a boathouse, and a dock. At the highest point of the island, there are ruins of a 13th century Franciscan monastery named Saint Sabina, a Roman woman martyred in 126 AD for converting to Christianity. Despite the island's many attractive qualities, no one has shown interest in buying it. The Dubrovnik District Council was contacted about a possible purchase, but council members were quick to nix the idea. Soon, local newspapers were running articles with the possible explanation. A few years ago, people started discovering human skeletons on the island. A word around town, Doxa has ghosts. According to local records, partisan forces entered Dubrovnik on October 18, 1944, and proceeded to round up dozens of suspected Nazi collaborators, including the priest and the newly appointed mayor. A little over a week later, communist authorities posted a notice in town explaining that 36 residents of Dubrovnik had been sentenced to be shot by a firing squad. Suspects were said to have been rowed out to Doxa on boats and be executed. Residents of Dubrovnik would later claim that there had been no record of any trial. and that the partisans had cautioned locals that anyone who went looking for relatives on the Elephant Islands would meet the same fate. So the bodies of alleged Nazi collaborators sat undisturbed on Daska for 60 years until an unnamed individual found a mass grave on the island in 2009. Forensic scientists excavated the site in September of that year and found remains of 53 people in 2 different locations. One site was in the remains of an old farmhouse basement. All of the skeletons were male. Along with the remains, excavators found crosses, rosaries, and priests' collars. Forensic scientists concluded that several Catholic priests were among the executed. Many family members continue to insist that their family members weren't Nazi collaborators or participants of the atrocities perpetrated by the notoriously brutal independent state of Croatia, a puppet state of Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, residents of the medieval city of Dubrovnik say ghosts of the executed men still haunt the island of Daska, seeking some sort of revenge. Palmyra Atoll. Located 1,600 kilometers south of Hawaii, Palmyra Atoll is a territory owned by the United States and is said to be a cursed place imbued with evil. The atoll was formed by a ring of coral growing along the rim of an ancient sunken volcano. Over the centuries, the reef has been blamed for several shipwrecks, one of which led to rumors of a cache of gold on the land, and is said to be haunted by the ghosts of the dead sailors. Palmyra also became notorious for ships vanishing without a trace, with seafarers telling tales of vessels entering its water and never being seen again. In 1855, a whaling ship reportedly ran aground on the atoll's treacherous reef, but when authorities from the mainland arrived to investigate its fate, no debris or survivors could be found. During World War II, Palmyra was used by the U.S. Navy as a staging area for air raids against Japan. The Navy also used the atoll as a refueling station for long-range air patrols and passing submarines. It was said that soldiers stationed there were plagued with panic attacks and an inexplicable feeling of impending doom. There were also reports of frequent violent outbursts and a number of suicides. In 1974, Palmyra was the scene of a gruesome double murder. San Diego couple Eleanor Muff Graham and Malcolm Mac Graham disappeared on August 29th during a sailing trip from Hawaii to Palmyra. An ex-convict called Buck Dwayne Walker and his girlfriend Stephanie Stearns were later charged with their murders after Eleanor's broken and bleached bones were found on the Palmyra beach. Her husband's body was never found and presumed dumped at sea. Clipperton Island. Clipperton Island was originally discovered by Ferdinand Magellan in 1521, but was later named after John Clipperton, an English pirate who led a mutiny against William Dampier in 1704. According to folklore, Clipperton hid treasure on the atoll, but this has never been found. More than 100 years later, the island was taken over by an American guano mining company. In 1857, the French disputed America's claim to Clipperton, declaring that the island was in fact part of Tahiti. In 1897, after several years of no permanent settlement, Mexico moved and established a military outpost on the island. In 1906, the British Pacific Island Company annexed the Clipperton, building a joint township with the Mexican government in order to mine guano. In that year, a lighthouse was also erected. In 1914, about 100 people, mixed men and women, lived on the island. Every 2 months, a ship from Acapulco went to the island to bring food. However, with the start of the Mexican Civil War, the atoll was no longer reachable by ship, and people on the island were on their own. By 1915, most of the inhabitants had died. The last settlers had wanted to leave on the American warship Lexington, which had reached the atoll in late 1915, but Mexican military governor declared that the evacuation was not necessary. By 1917, all the men on the island had died except the lighthouse keeper, along with 15 women. By July that year, all but 3 of the women had died, and were picked up by the American ship Yorktown. Ownership of Clipperton was then disputed between France and Mexico. France approached the Vatican for a decision on who owned the lonely atoll. In 1930, the Vatican gave the rights to the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel II, who declared 1 year later that Clipperton was a part of France. When the Clipperton was finally declared a French possession, the lighthouse was rebuilt, and the French settled a military outpost on the island. The outpost only remained there for 7 years, and then the French abandoned it. It has remained uninhibited ever since.